As a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. My big concerns is, whether is the excessive and increased funding that we're giving HHS being spent wisely. There's a couple areas I want to focus on. One is the FDA. The approval time for new cancer treatments is remarkably long, on average 7 to 12 years. HHS handling of refugee settlement, that's another problem I want to talk about. Let's talk about these NIH grants, though. This is a topic near and dear to me where, we have a major budget increase for cancer research, but not a clear direction for the administration on how we're speeding up approvals of new cures and therapies. So, do you know what portion of NIH funding goes to cancer research?
My understanding is it is $7.6 billion on cancer-related research out of NIH.
Yeah. And how in the weeds does your office get in figuring out how that's spent and then developing metrics for how effective that money is spent?
We do not have any ongoing Representative Crenshaw work looking at cancer research out of NIH.
Okay. I would urge you to. Let's look at childhood cancer drugs, for instance. On average, 6.5 years longer than the approval for adult cancer drugs. Why? That would be a great question to ask. If we're going to increase funding for NIH and FDA, and we should know what we're getting for it. But the IG doesn't have any opinion on this, whether we're using those funds effectively at all?
We just don't have any ongoing work looking at it. We're happy to I would love for my folks to come up and talk to you about some of your concerns. We do have work looking at different processes that FDA has, including the accelerated pathway program, and we had some findings in that space. But we don't have anything specific to cancer research.
Okay, yeah, let's talk more broadly. So findings in that space, do you have a quick idea of could you tell us about that?
Well, OIG's mission is to ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent appropriately, and so our work looking at grants management ensures oversight so that taxpayer dollars on grants, and in the instance you're citing, grants specific to cancer research.
No, I said talk more broadly. You said you had findings in the space of the accelerated approval program. What were the findings?
Oh, I'm sorry. So that report looked at this process where they can approve drugs, but then they can have confirmatory trials later. We looked at the extent to which confirmatory trials were happening. Now, that doesn't mean that the safety is compromised, but the confirmatory trials are meant to look at the efficacy that's promised by the drug. Mm-hmm. We did find, I believe, roughly a third of those confirmatory trials were late, and a handful of confirmatory trials were late between 5 and 10 years. So as a general matter, what OIGs do is take a look at whether there's adherence to requirements. We do not set policies. I cannot force FDA, CMS, NIH to take the recommendations we make. We make recommendations and they decide to take them or not. But in that report, we looked at how they were following their rules and the time that it took for these confirmatory trials to happen.
Yeah. There's also many rules surrounding the extent to which the FDA has to communicate with its customer, whoever's seeking drug approval. And have you done an investigation on how effective that communication is, quality of communication? Because that's my number one complaint I hear about. People don't, it's like a black hole. They can't get answers from the FDA. They have timelines for their investors, for their products, and they can't get a single answer from these people. Is there any investigations ongoing in that regard?
We have work looking at approval of drugs that would include Aduhelm for Alzheimer's, and we are looking at the extent to which there was communication with external partners. Now, in that instance, we would be looking at whether or not there was inappropriate types of communication. Okay. would it be appropriate for us to come up and talk to you about some of your concerns about communication and see?
I'm
if
looking
we
for
can-
their effective communication, productive communication. That would seem, because, and because that would seem to fall right in line with handling taxpayer dollars effectively. If we're going to pay an agency to approve drugs, it should actually have a effective process for approving drugs instead of whatever it's doing now. And your office seems well positioned to maybe focus on that. We'd love to talk more about it, but I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Ruiz, for his 5
Thank you.
minutes.
Thank you for joining us today, Inspector General Grimm. I appreciate your office's consistent attention to the quality of care that unaccompanied children receive in ORR facilities. I remain deeply concerned